One great thing about living in Nigeria, it's really boring, and 2024 has not been an exception. It's been a challenging and dynamic period for the economy, and the tech ecosystem has not been left out of the excitement. We came into the year with a great deal of uncertainty, but have had a surprisingly robust start to the year. We've seen growth of companies into new markets, the rare sight of funding in another sector beating fintech, and even quiet as it's kept, we've seen exits. We have more tech players finding new paths to profitability, and an interesting conversation around climate tech in Africa. Come with us and let's see what all this means to you at home.
Hello and welcome to Tech into the Future, where we talk about everything that's happening in technology and how it affects you. My name is Ngozi Maduka-Dozie. I look after Android partnerships for West Africa at Google.
And my name is Tomiwa Ladikomo. I'm the CEO of Tech Cabal, a digital publication that's been covering African tech for the last decade. Alongside Ngozi, I'll be your guide into the world of tech in Nigeria, Africa, and the world.
So the last time we did a review, it was 2023. Actually, I believe it was our very first show. And my word for the year was resilience.
I think mine was challenging.
Challenging. And that's us talking about 2023.
2023.
All right. So now we've had the first quarter of 2024. Would you change your word?
I mean, challenging still fits.
I think
but
so.
I would also add dynamic. I think
yes,
it's been
fair enough, actually, very fair.
Yeah.
And actually, I will keep the word resilient because I think that it is challenging, it is dynamic, and you're constantly bobbing and weaving. And so, yes, I think resilience. And I think part of what we saw in in the beginning of the year, there's been a few things that have happened, major things. So, obviously, the devaluation of the naira, and that is a big deal, especially when we talk about technology, because what makes us part of the digital economy is your smartphone, right?
Yeah.
Or at least having a digital device.
Yeah.
And the devaluation of the naira, being that we don't make any of these devices here in Nigeria, means that we're importing all of them.
Yep.
And so last year, your most affordable device was probably around 50, maybe 45,000 naira. It's like an itel, so a Chinese smartphone device. It's also an Android device. Woohoo. This year, that very same device is probably going to land you somewhere around 80,000 naira, which makes us incredible because whoever is buying is not earning any more, right? And so the cost of being part of the digital economy just got more expensive. So that's the impact of, one of the impacts of the devaluation of the naira directly to this entire conversation we have every day, which is that the 100 million mobile users that are currently sitting on either MTN or Glo or Nine Mobile or Airtel, currently on a phone that does not have any digital connectivity, it will now cost them almost twice as much for them to get
a new device.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting about that is beyond just the device itself, you get to think about like the impact of inflation, the devaluation on people's sort of like wallets.
Yes, exactly.
And so you have food inflation sort of like really, really high. And what that means is that people are spending more money on food, which means they have less money for data. They have less money for other things within the sort of digital economy. But I do like your word resilience because I think it's been a surprisingly robust quarter. I mean, funding's down versus last year, but despite that, you have startups adjusting to the conditions.
Yes.
Quietly, we're seeing some exits. You have a lot of strategy shifting. And I mean, I think a constant conversation within the ecosystem now is how to build for a global audience and how to build services that they can sell in other markets.
Yeah.
And so we're starting to see a lot of sort of startups kind of like make those adjustments, start to do that work. And I think over the course of the year, we'll see that sort of trend accelerate.
So speaking about, what was the word you just said now?
Resilience.
Yeah, no, adjustments is what you said. Yes, so now, speaking of adjustment, I think what did help was that 2023 almost kind of prepared us in a way for 2024 because we were already in a funding winter, right? So you saw startups starting to think differently about efficiency and just saying, well, what if money doesn't come tomorrow, right? What if we can't raise? What if we don't raise enough? And so the thinking around mergers and acquisitions and efficiencies started to happen last year, and we're seeing that play out in the first quarter of this year. We actually had a couple guests over the quarter that talked about, listen, we're open to being acquired if anyone is interested.
Yeah.
We talked, there were some funders that were here talking about their interest, well, how they are now very efficient, and they're now, the eye is on like how what's the word that was used? Like how, micro, my word escapes me today.
Okay.
But the point anyway was that it was more so about how scaled down they are in their operations, never mind their increased reach. So it's just back to efficiency.
Yeah, so I think we've gone from growth at all costs, we're going to spend like all the money in the world and like become the biggest things to you got to have sustainable growth.
Exactly.
And I think you're right in that startups came into the year very, very aware of the need to be more capital efficient. And so they are playing a longer game. Yeah. I think that's ultimately good for the market. That startups are playing a more realistic game. And part of the conversations that we've heard are both from the investor and the operator side, making more pragmatic choices about whether to merge or, what strategies to pursue or, like we're going to serve the market that we can serve properly, rather than sort of like attempts to grow super huge.
Right. There was also something about like foreign investor perceptions, right? I think a few things have happened in the market, and not even necessarily tech related, but just related to how we're perceived in terms of, listen, if I put money into Nigeria, what are the odds that I'm going to, first of all, get it out, and then even like 2x or 3x. And I think, with the situation that surrounds Binance, not even going into any more detail, saying who's right or wrong, but just Binance in general, even to be honest, let's even, right now that is playing in front of us is, Lagos versus the federal government versus Landmark, right? And some of those things are important, not because they're necessarily technology.
But they affect the way.
Yes, exactly. But they affect the perception of the market.
Yeah, it's interesting. I spoke to an investor yesterday who said, full 50% of his conversation with an LP was about this Landmark situation, and he's not. He's a tech investor, and he's talking to a tech LP, but their concerns are like, can we do business in this market?
Exactly.
So always a big thing. Don't go anywhere. This is Tech into the Future on Arise News.
Welcome back to Tech into the Future. Funding rounds, acquisition, big tech layoffs, and all the in-betweens of the first quarter of the year got us wondering what the year holds for the African and the global tech ecosystem. Today, we take a look at the emerging technologies shaping our world.
So let's start with the global picture.
Yes.
So NVIDIA became one of the most.
You have to tell us what NVIDIA is first.
Okay, so it's a good point. It's a good point. So NVIDIA makes some of the most powerful chips in the world. They're the chips powering sort of AI and all the AI explosion. Those chips have become incredibly hard to get, incredibly expensive, and the company has risen in value to a market cap of $2.22 trillion.
Trillion dollars.
It's insane. I mean, it's insane that these days you have companies valued in the trillions of dollars. That's larger than the Nigerian economy. It's larger than most African economies. It is truly interesting how big these companies are getting, how powerful they're getting. And NVIDIA, I think, is a particularly interesting one. It's powering the AI revolution, which is sweeping the world and changing things in really, really interesting ways.
Speaking of AI, have you noticed everything you touch, every single thing you touch, from all your Google apps to Spotify to eBay to Amazon, everyone now has AI features.
So let me ask you a question. How much of that is real innovation versus packaging?
First of all, that is
I will be clear. Let me just contextualize the question, because I am seeing services that I had last year, but now they say AI. And you know.
So here's the thing.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, right? Artificial intelligence, machine learning has always existed. It's not today, right? The truth is, if you use search as an example, and I'm always going to use Google examples.
It's been very,
You know, the truth of the matter is that, you know, you find that before, as you're typing, it's prompting certain things, right?
Because it's been doing that for a decade,
exactly, it's been doing that forever, and that's
Yeah.
because these companies have truly, honestly, always used AI. But I think they've also used AI more back end before consumer AI came out, which is this generative AI, right? And now you and I have access to it. And I think what they're trying to do is draw the line to say we've always had AI. Like we're not shocked by it. I mean,
they're putting
it's
it in
new
front
to
of the
us,
customer.
but it's not new to them, and they're letting us know that they are still very much on the money, on the ball when it comes to being innovative companies. I think this is their way of demonstrating that they've always been on top of AI, that they actually do use AI to at the back end of a lot of the things that we enjoy. Now they're just bringing it to the front end for consumers. Yeah.
I think what's interesting is kind of the localization of that. And so speaking with a number of investors, of course, they don't want to miss this AI wave. And so there's a lot of thinking, but I think what's interesting is what is the thinking about how AI can be used here? And so we're seeing companies sort of attempts to innovate using AI to solve healthcare problems.
Yes.
To solve logistics problems, even things like education, agriculture. And I think it will be interesting to see some of those companies kind of come to prominence, especially when you look at kind of the eye-popping valuations that sort of like AI-driven companies are getting on a global basis. But I think the difference between the Western world and here is we have so many fundamental problems, and you hope that AI actually can be instrumental in actually moving us forward on those issues. Yeah.
So I don't doubt that it can. I guess our question is, do we then have to be the ones that are using AI, or is it the AI companies that just have to keep the emerging markets and Africa front and center as they innovate for things that concern us? And the reason why I ask is that there's been a lot of conversations about how we can jump into the AI conversation for all, for good reason. But I wonder if, so if I take a step back and I just think about what does it take to power AI as an example, and then I think about our power challenges as they are, like I don't have any clue what Rack Center's bill is, right? But imagine, so when we talk about, the digital age, right? It's all just data, like think about scaffolding of like data, right? And just racks of servers, et cetera, housed in a warehouse, and what you need, how much energy you need to power that kind of infrastructure, and whether or not we even have that. So I wonder, in as much as I agree, we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, I'm wondering if we should probably focus on, fixing the challenges that we have using, digital technology, but then maybe leaving AI as an example, for...
So I think we talked a bit about this.
Right.
We've agreed you've got to be able to kind of tackle these things. And I think actually talking about power is interesting because you've seen sort of power tariffs rise quite aggressively very recently. It's an interesting challenge. There's going to be a period of adoption, of adjustment. A theme that we keep coming to on this show is sort of real world economy things affect the viability of your tech economy. AI is a ridiculously power-hungry field, and everywhere in the world they're dealing with that reality. So the hope is that the moves that this administration is making on power actually sort of lead to a more robust power infrastructure, because you are going to need that for AI. We've talked about the talents that you need to power an AI revolution, and so through MTT, the government sort of plan to train 3 million technical talents is a critical element in our ability to do this. But when you have the power, you have the talent, or you're developing the power, you're developing the talent, you then need startups and founders and brilliant people to come up with ideas that solve real problems in the market. And I think that these things are complex systems. We have what we call wicked problems in Africa, and it's really tempting to attempt to solve them one at a time. But really, you have to be solving a range of connected problems and be moving forward. Otherwise, you're going to wait until you get power sorted, and that's going to take another 5 years or 10 years.
I agree.
Or you're going to wait until you have the talent, and then that, you're 10 years behind what is an exponential race.
I agree with you totally. I just wonder if, and this is just a plain devil's advocate, are we better off maybe deciding in where we want to play, still within AI, still within digital innovation, and still within solving our wicked problems, but just deciding exactly where we want to play, right? So that whatever it is we do is impactful. And again, referring back to one of our previous episodes where we talked about our strength is in our youth population, and how do we, so instead of trying to fix power so that we can then start generating, we can have warehouses of power, AI infrastructure, perhaps we focus on our youth and just making sure that we're double clicking on the talent. Yes, I said double clicking on our talent, because that is our strength.
Yeah. So I think, look, you mentioned devices earlier on. So you're going to train the talent. You got to get them access to devices, because it's hard to be a coder or a developer or to build a company if you don't have a laptop, if you don't have a phone. Right. So again, it's a system of things that you've got to fix. And so again, I think that's a place where we are moving in the right direction. Again, in the sort of being able to do multiple things at the same time. This is why you have ministers with different portfolios. This is why you have different portions of the economy. So it's there's investors, and they're looking for brilliant ideas, and they will fund brilliant ideas. Someone's working on making sure that there's the talent to support those brilliant ideas. Somebody else is working on it. There's the power to, and then someone's got to work to make sure that the devices are affordable. And so I think that we must have a dynamic ecosystem. We must have a dynamic economy in which the different players are playing their roles in moving us forward. And I think that's really, really, really critical. Speaking of the funders, on a global basis, so funding for VC is down. Tiger Global raised $2.2 billion for its latest venture capital fund, which is about a third.
I like how $2.2 billion is down, though.
It's down. It was a third of their last fund.
Which was about $6 billion.
In Africa, we are 47% down in terms of fundraising for Q1 versus last year. I guess the only bright spot in there is that it's not as low as we thought it might be. We actually thought it might go down even more than that. And there's sort of new sources of capital coming into the market and new sectors sort of rising. So that's actually a bright spot for the ecosystem.
And I wonder also if that then opens up more room for local investors, because in as much as I want to raise in USD, the pressure then to churn out in USD becomes incredibly, backbreaking.
So the critical thing there for the audience is if you raise your capital in dollars, then you have to report your revenue in dollars. And so if you've got to convert it, your books were at 900 in December, and now it's 1,200 or 1,300, whatever it is, it becomes, the barriers become a lot higher. So that makes kind of the work of the Nigerian, the NGX, and their tech board a lot more important. You are seeing sort of a lot more conversations about raising capital in Naira.
Locally,
I think that's definitely an important step as we move forward. And it's good that we're having those conversations. We'll see that play out more.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Don't go anywhere. You are still with Tech into the Future on Arise News. We'll be back.
Welcome back to Tech into the Future on Arise TV.
So, I get that the quarter has seen what we call a decline. Never mind that we have raised $466 million, we being Africa. There's still a 47% decline. I do think that the harsh realities notwithstanding, there have been some interesting opportunities that I see some of these African countries kind of jumping on. One is climate and sustainability. And so in Ethiopia, I believe, there was a Japanese manufacturer that has raised $4 million there, and is to build electric vehicles. I think it's called Dodia.
Yeah.
So that's one, and I think there's another one in Kenya.
Yeah. No, I think climate tech's been super resilient, and there's a lot of funding going into that space right now. A lot of activity in terms of carbon credits and thinking about carbon capture, e-mobility, so Dodai and other sort of companies like that doing sort of raising interesting funding.
There's also Basigo. Basigo, is that it?
Yeah, exactly.
In Kenya, that raised about $3 million.
Yeah. So surprisingly robust industry. I think a bit bigger in East Africa than it is in Western Africa. But
electric cars, which electricity? I'm sorry.
You said that, not me.
I'm just saying, these are the realities.
Yeah. No. So I think a really interesting period. So rise of funding for climate tech, and then an interesting quarter where funding for logistics actually exceeded sort of the funding for fintech. And fintech's still quite a robust space, but definitely an interesting spot to see logistics companies and sort of actually take the lead on the funding perspective.
But I was teasing about electric cars, but I do wonder, especially with the power situation we have, what potential opportunities there might be in solar. Which, has always been here, but it's interesting, or it will be interesting to see what types of innovation will come out of that. So there's
a lot of companies doing a lot of interesting work in that space. And
tech work or just solar work?
But those are renewable energy companies, so they are technology companies. They're applying technology to solve a fundamental energy problem on the continent. Yeah. I think going on to a conversation that we've talked about quite a bit over the course of this quarter is sort of the changing face of banking.
Yes.
And it's been interesting to see sort of the fintechs continue to play a bigger and bigger role within the Nigerian ecosystem. You have startups like MoneyPoint, who I think we interviewed their VP earlier this quarter. Now generating about half the volume of transactions on NIBS.
Wow.
On the national switch. And so these startups continue to play a bigger and bigger role in terms of how payments are done, how money moves within our economy. And they've been pretty resilient despite the challenges. And so, I thought what was really interesting was talking with both Carbon as well as with Kuda. And sort of the last episode we talked to the commerce company Omni Retail. And seeing the way sort of their services are starting to extend. So building credit for businesses, building credit where it's needed. And so not just customer credit or consumer credit, but credit for businesses. Again, all of those things are shaping the economy in really important ways. They enable business in a way that we didn't have it previously. Yeah.
And I tell you, so I agree with you wholeheartedly, and it actually brings me back to the same passion point. I have this passion about equipping Nigerians with digital devices. And one of the things, yes, we've acknowledged that they're expensive, but device financing is one of the things that can bridge that. And I think one of the missed opportunities from this quarter is open banking, because I think that that's what's going to help a lot of so right now you have people that are, all these companies that are doing microfinancing and micro lending, but they're doing it either with very interesting ways of collection or with their own ways of credit scoring, right? But what would really help the credit infrastructure would be open banking. And I think if that is executed in Nigeria, I think that will go a long way for building credit, having these MoneyPoint is able to be half of the market share of the transactions. Let's see what happens when
all the startups have access to the same kind of data around.
Very true.
I think there's definitely a real opportunity in there. And again, in terms of kind of building things step by step, you see the CBN moving on. So earlier this year they released new crypto rules.
Yes.
And so open banking, they've announced the rules around it, but you definitely, from an implementation perspective, I think there's still work to be done. And looking forward to seeing that. I think that still, talking about money, a really interesting thing is, you mentioned earlier, when I invest, will I be able to bring it out of the market?
Yes.
And when we talk about resilience, and unfortunately I won't be able to mention some of these companies, what's been interesting to me is seeing exits start to happen.
Right.
And mostly through secondaries.
Yes.
We have companies and some of the smaller funds are able to sort of, as the fundraising, as subsequent rounds are being raised, some of these companies actually, or some of these funds actually being able to return money to their investors.
Yes.
And that's one of those signals that's really important for global audiences. You want the big exits, which is Flutter Wave listing on the New York Stock Exchange,
right.
so you want those kind of big, visible exits. But even for smaller investors, angel investors, people who are putting in smaller checks into the market, I think the conversation on the street is that money is coming back.
Yes.
And that's really good because it means that you asked about local capital. It means that if I invested $10,000 into a fund and it returns 10x, I get $100,000 back. That gives me, even if I want to take $50,000 home and spend it on life, I have another $50,000 that I can invest, and that's 5 more checks that I can put into the market. And I think that is driving a robustness of investment into new startups that is really important for the markets.
You know what? You've just given me an idea for our next show, or at least one of the next shows, is that we should actually do a thing on exits, on the small exits. Because I think that the small exits, they go unnoticed, and they're not building the confidence that we actually do need built in the investor community. So I think that's what we just have a list and say, okay, investment here, exit was this much at this point, so that people understand.
You're going to get them to be willing to come and talk on television,
well,
but we'll do some of that homework. Excellent. Yeah. Don't go anywhere. This is Tech into the Future on Arise TV. Thanks for joining us on Tech into the Future on Arise TV today. My name is Tomiwa Aladikomo.
And I'm Ngozi Marukadozie. Join us next time as we take you into the business and impact of technology in Africa, how it's changing the world around you, and how it's changing your world. Stay tuned on Arise News.